Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Opinionated SEO Opinions, where we are joined by Segun Adeniyi, this time a senior SEO strategist at Critical Mass. Welcome, Segun.
Thank you very much.
I am also joined by our wonderful host, Sam Torres. Is everything going well?
Hey, everybody. I have a new dog, so it's been a stressful week, but a good week. Yes.
A good week, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. So today we are going to be talking about SEO takes from around the web, and it is going to be a very intriguing conversation. I cannot wait for it. Segun, before we get started, would you like to talk about yourself a little bit and intro yourself to our guests?
Awesome. First of all, I just want to thank you for bringing me on this platform. I'm a big fan of the show, and there's been very, very interesting dialogue and a lot of strong opinions on here. And I'm happy to add my 2 cents to the dialogue. So my name is Segun Adeniyi. I have been practicing SEO now for 8 years, but I like to say I've really only been practicing good SEO for like 5 years. The first few years, they were very murky. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. My background is in computer science. And, I grew up in a space where my dad was a huge computer nerd, and he kind of like brought me along the way. And I kind of fell into SEO. I don't know what everyone else, like how people get into SEO, but I kind of accidentally fell into SEO, and I fell in love ever since. And I've been pursuing growth and knowledge ever since.
Awesome.
Sounds familiar. Wonderful, though. Thank you so much.
I feel like we all fall into it. I'm not sure. Like maybe now people are growing up saying I want to be an SEO, but I know for me, I thought I was going to go into visual merchandising and branding.
Oh,
not at all. No, that's not what I'm doing at all. But I also was a developer before that, so the code just kind of makes sense. And Begum, you kind of fell into it as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I was thinking that I would be in Japan. I was like, no. But to be honest, I'm an international trade major, and I loved marketing in all its different aspects. And when I saw and first introduced the digital marketing, I was like, this is something I can do. So then when I was looking for a career, I was like, SEO sounded fun. Let's go give it a go. Yeah. So yeah, kind of fell into it as well. If you are all ready, I am ready to shoot our first question.
Let's do this.
Lovely. So with the rise of voice search and AI technology, Segun, how do you see SEO evolving in the next few years?
That's a very interesting question, and I get like asked this a lot. And I think my opinion on this is very, very. It depends, right? Is the usual SEO answer, but I do think the principles of SEO is going to stay the same, right? Mm-hmm. Our jobs as SEOs is very simply defined as creating useful content and making it discoverable. And I think in the aspect of creating useful content, we're seeing a lot of changes with AI, and we know how Google is reacting to the changes with AI. But I think what's actually going to be very, very interesting moving forward, and I don't know how many SEOs are really paying attention to this because I just kind of even fell into it myself, is the idea of building entities and like completing Google's knowledge graph, right? And I think that's going to be the most important thing for us moving forward is how do I, as an SEO, ensure that Google fully understands my pages, right? Mm-hmm. Am I connecting my pages properly? Am I using the right? And I think things are going to continually develop, right? Like we have schema types right now that we know are going to keep expanding. And that's where my mind is. And that's the area that I want to dive more into and improve my area of my knowledge in how can I keep growing my entities and helping Google discover my pages better, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we've been talking a lot about with AI and voice search, I love that you're bringing up the entities, and would love to dig in a little bit more about like what are the things you're doing to kind of prepare or optimize for that. But any thoughts around like, so something that Tori and I talk about all the time is that SEO is expanding way beyond Google. I feel like we've been Google centric for so long. any thoughts on like where, like, do you think the next 5 years will still be mostly focused on Google? Do you think it's going to continue to diverse from there? Is there a platform, since you do work on more global and international brands, is there something that maybe the mainstream isn't catching, or something that we need to be on the look for outside of just Google?
Personally, I think Google is, unless there's a huge seismic shift, I think Google is still going to be the largest player in the market in 5 years, right? I think depending on your vertical, your audience might be somewhere else, right? And I think that's kind of important, is focusing like where typically is my audience and how can I best connect with my audience, right? Like we've seen the rise of social and how important social is to search. Right now, even I as a person, like the way I search has changed now and how I used to search 5 years ago, right? Like if I'm looking for a restaurant, the first thing I do is I probably pull out my phone, I search on Google, I see what's close to me, then I go on TikTok and I see what the experience is like, right? And I think it's a good question, is that where do we sit as SEOs in that journey, right? Something that I like to do is map out, like, how do I, for any brand I'm working with, how do I touch at every stage of the funnel, right? Like, what am I doing when someone is trying to discover me in the awareness phase? Like, and what are the touch points I need to be focusing on? Is it just Google? Is it Reddit? Is it TikTok? Is it even LinkedIn, right? Like even now, LinkedIn is getting more prominence in terms of like how people find information. So I think that's very important, right? Like is focusing on, rather than just, I don't like to think of like, oh, is it going to be Google or TikTok or anything like that? I try to connect as much as possible with my audience first and think about what my audience's expected experience is going to be, and then providing valuable content that meets that experience.
I love that. Really giving the perspective of start with the customer first, right? And let that kind of dictate your plan. We totally agree. I think that's usually the way to go. Because at the end of the day, yes, the internet is a bunch of computers and machines, but it's to connect people, right? Ideally, it's people on the other ends of those terminals. And, sometimes it is just a bot. Obviously, Google crawlers are important as well. But I love that, of just taking that people first perspective. So kudos to that.
And also, as the algorithms change, people's behavior also changes. And I have recently read a few reports, and I guess it was Gartner's report that suggested that social media usage is going to be decreased by 25% by 2025. And people don't really trust what they see on Google because they get so many conflicting results, or they cannot find what they search for, and their user journey is becoming a bit more complex rather than how it used to be, even though Google is trying to make everything more simpler. Like the intent is not always satisfied just via a single search. So there are a follow-up questions, etc., that we come up with, or additional searches that we have to go through. So considering all of those, I think really how people are going to engage with search is going to change in a few years. But Google might still be the major platform that we're going to go to.
Well, and what was it? Was it yesterday? A report came out that showed like they still have 61% of the share. So, it's not the 68% or 72% that they had for many years, right? It obviously has dropped. I do think it's interesting. I don't know if y'all have seen the battles or the wars that people are having on, is TikTok a search engine? But then they call YouTube a search engine. So like, why is one a search engine and the other's not? I don't know. Yeah. But to your point, I think it's totally true, Begum, of it's all going to be, how does consumer shift? And also, as we continue to see that these more digitally native audiences, because I'm just going to go ahead and age myself here, like they are wanting to return back to more in-person relationship-based decision making, because they haven't experienced it. It's not what's been made available to them. So I do think it's really interesting to continue watching and see how that evolves.
And like, in addition to that, like I think And this is why I have a lot of faith in Google, right?
Mm.
My understanding, and this is maybe wishful thinking, is the way AI is going. Like, what is the best case scenario for AI? Are we all going to just keep being on like Perplexity or like ChatGPT, or are we going to actually see more functional uses of AI? Meaning, currently we all use Siri or and Google. I forget what the Google
Google
version of
Assistant. Yeah, I
Siri
can't
is.
remember what it's
Google
called.
Assistant. But then you think about like, how is the average person going to want to interact with their devices, right? So I think about myself. Today, maybe I'm thinking, I want to have ramen, right? So I want to have my assistant be able to find, hey, can you find me a place that sells ramen and also sells sushi because my partner wants to have sushi close to me, right? And that is potentially one of the use cases where AI can come into play and enhance the experience of our assistants. But where do we come into that position as SEOs, right? Like, and that's where we start to think about like how we can influence how Google understands our businesses with entities, right? It's still underdeveloped in my opinion, and I think it's still something that we as SEOs still need to like. I know for a fact I'm not an expert in structured data, and it's something that it's piqued my curiosity recently, and I'm trying my best now to align more with what is currently on the market, but seeing how it's going to enhance is what I'm really curious to see.
I love structured data. I'm happy to talk about it anytime you want to. Love it.
To the right place.
Yeah, and I would agree that, you know, building the entities, building the connections is really where we can assist the most. Because exactly like you say, with the AI tools, what are we going to keep using? ChatGPT is just fancy autocomplete, right? There's not a lot of thought. There's not a lot of reason behind it. You know, obviously, if you've ever tried to make it do math, great. Yeah, so I do think the work of making connections is I love that, because I think it's really a place where we can add value. Certainly, SEO is not dying. I am so sick of hearing that. I've been doing SEO for 13 years. A number of times I've been told that my career is going to die. It's probably about as long as I've had my career. So, you know, I think we're still going to be needed. And then especially as now we're seeing, I actually saw a report come out earlier this week about like, it's funny because so earlier this week, I hosted an entire webinar on using AI and how do you implement it into your processes and things like that. And people are very excited. But then when you go to consumers, they don't trust AI. Mm-hmm. They just don't. And I do think part of that is some of the tools got released before they were really ready. And so that hurt the overall reputation that it's going to take more work for some of those tools to dig themselves out of a hole, essentially. So it is going to be interesting to see like how much are people going to allow this to become part of their everyday as they continue to learn about it. And there's all the sensationalism and news stories and what's going on. I do think there are some really cool tools out there, but what's funny is a lot, and maybe funny is the wrong word, but what's interesting is it feels like the tools that we're talking about that use AI that are really life-changing, industry-changing, like take humanity to another level. Mm-hmm. They've been being worked on for years at this point. It is not new. Now, certainly because of like ChatGPT, the OpenAI API, other things that are happening, we're starting to see more people enter the marketplace with ideas, which I think is exciting. But certainly where we're seeing like the most change of like helping clean up healthcare problems and being able to like put together some prediction models of like, hey, based on these markers, these like this group of people are more at risk for these types of things. And so we should send them communication about how to do preventative health. And like, that's really exciting. But that's not new because of ChatGPT. Those are things that have been being worked on for a while now. It's just whether the public really knew that it was happening anyways. So that's my 2 cents about AI and trust. But, yeah. That's why we're doing hot takes. It's a hot takes around the web. Woo.
So from taking it from marketing back to SEO, I would like to know if you can share an example of an SEO strategy that you initially thought that wouldn't work, but now you are finding it quite effective.
This is interesting because like when you do get into SEO, there's advice from everywhere, right? Like you see so many different people have so many different opinions, and it's kind of hard to decipher like what exactly should you follow. And I was very lucky when I came into Canada because I had a VP who once told me, always think about at the end of the day, what exactly is Google's mission? And like, as long as you're driving value, then it shouldn't be a problem. So a brand we worked on recently, right? We had an issue where we're serving multiple locations, right? For services that we offer across like Canada and the US. And the challenge was this is a small player in the market. They have decent domain authority, but they're competing against some high authority, high traffic sites. And my knowledge of SEO at the time was Google doesn't like those service pages, programmatic service pages in multiple locations that do maybe similar things, but that could be counterintuitive. However, I had to ask myself that, look, is this providing value? Yes, right? Someone searching for this service in Manitoba is going to be getting a very different experience for someone searching for the same service in Florida, for instance, right? So essentially what we ended up doing was programmatic service pages, optimizing it enough to show distinct localized signals to search engines, right? Something that I found very curious was I was listening to Kyle Roof, who has done a lot of experimentation on what signals essentially do you need to send to Google from your pages, and where is the most important parts that you need to put those signals for Google to understand what the page is about. And it's controversial because it can seem spammy, but essentially what we did was send enough local signals from the H2s, from the H1s. So it's in the construction space. So saying things as opposed to just saying like, oh, in the H1 saying like excavator rentals in Miami, and then having a list of excavators. Essentially what we did was go a step further and like break it down to like sending those localized signals in the H2 saying, hey, Google, this is how many 30-feet excavators we have in Miami, and then have a list of those, the 30 feet, and break that down to classes. And we sent multiple signals. And essentially what ended up happening was we were driving traffic through, because the way people search is funny, right? Like people do not search for excavator rentals Toronto, right? But because that was our H1, Google was picking that up and ranking for that keyword. And essentially, my understanding was that Google didn't really understand the page, because when people were searching for just excavator rentals in Toronto without the location in the keyword, we were ranking really well. Just by adding those signals, improving the number of local signals that we're sending to the page, adding adding a map to the page as well, we ended up going from page 3 for most of our local pages to page 1. And now we're ranking in the first 2 results for those pages. And we're beating out some of the actual like bigger competitors in the market with a smaller domain site, which is essentially, a huge win. And it's something I've been really excited about.
Yeah, that's super cool. Because sometimes taking on the big boys is really difficult. Oh, I mean, it sucks. Yeah, I think for me, the first time, it was really when EEAT, well, at the time, just EAT started to be talked about. So this is also when having links to external sites was considered bad. right?
Mm.
External links, and you didn't want Google to follow and da da da. But because of EAT, like adding to a profile page of somebody's credentials, and like I remember because I had some clients in the medical space, and so adding the links to like the different doctor directory sites and like the doctor specific profiles pages on those sites, I was like, this is going to be bad for us. People are going to click away from our site and go to like, for one of them, I just remember like there was a lot on psychology.org and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this is bad. No, it wasn't. It wasn't bad. EAT, which, okay, kind of like my earlier thing about like, why do people not consider TikTok a search engine? I don't understand. Also, because their algorithm is so, why do people still argue that EEAT is not a thing?
I truly cannot understand.
You know, I think the problem is always like, how do you make a case for like impact, right? Like, and this goes back to what we talk about, what the future of SEO is going to look like, right? Not everything we do as SEOs is going to show like immediate impact, right? But at the end of the day, right, like as long as you're building a framework for Google to better understand and contextualize your page, then you do have it. I mean, you run the risk that if Google understands your page better, Google is like, well, maybe I don't want to rank.
Maybe this is actually not good.
And I mean, I always explore different theories. I think one theory I'm exploring now is less sometimes better, right? And I have no proof for this, by the way, right? Like this is something I'm currently exploring, where I was looking at a particular keyword that I'm exploring for a client, and the top 5-6 results have very little content on page, but the bottom 7 of the top 10, they have loads of content. And my argument now is, I know how, like, you know, when we've seen a titanic shift where Google is trying to implement like helpful content. So for any page you write now, you're writing what is and how and types. But sometimes is it better to maybe stick to the actual like search that your query that you're trying to answer? And this is a thought that I'm currently going through, right? Where is Google struggling to understand the intent of your page because of how much content you have on that page? And Google essentially doesn't know where to rank you, right? I don't know what your thoughts are on that as well.
So that's actually with the talks I do about like what is the impact of AI on search. I think is making it a lot more possible for brands to stop worrying about the foundational level content. Because also I can say, like, especially with enterprise customers or companies selling to enterprises, the number of times I have heard, if I have to explain what this is, you are not qualified to buy my product, right? And I think that's true. Like, and also, how stupid is it? I used to have, this was a long time ago, but I had a client that did like concrete forms. And so my writer at the time, she's amazing. She's actually like a director of SEO at another agency. I'm so proud of her. She's won all kinds of awards. She's awesome. But she started as a writer, and one of her first pieces was like, what is concrete? And the history of concrete, which, y'all, it's actually a lot more fascinating than I would have thought. It comes back from Roman times. But like, if you are someone who's buying concrete forms for construction, do you need to know what the history of concrete is to do your job? Probably not. So like it's been really silly, I think, and something that we've kind of had to do because of the way the algorithm worked of writing all this foundational beginner level content, that now, because AI can spin that up so easily, and like even what's going on with the update, and Google's trying to reduce like the fluff as much as 40%. Like, honestly, I think that's what most of the fluff is where we felt like we had to do intro level content to show that we have expertise, to show that we know what we're talking about. where I'm getting really excited is it feels like that is something that is going away, that we can stick to who is my ideal customer? What is the target persona? And I'm going to talk directly to them, especially because, and this is a separate soapbox, that I also feel like a lot of the ranking platforms, like they are great tools. They are great indicators to show you direction.
Yeah.
But search results are so personalized now.
Yes.
That, honestly, I don't care if I rank number one for 80% of people. I'm only going after 5%. I just want to rank number one for those 5%. And I think what we're seeing is that search engines are getting smart enough to do that, and they're understanding the user well enough to position that. So I will say it's something that we're testing as well, pruning some of that fluff content, as I've called it before, especially if you are going after enterprise audiences, or especially if you are like your money or your life, unless you're talking to consumers. Like if you're talking to other doctors, for example, like we shouldn't have to explain what is an EKG. Like, boo. You should know what an EKG is. You have a doctor.
Right.
Like, so, anyways, that's a really long way to say, I think I'm totally with you. And honestly, from what we've been doing so far, we are seeing good results. And on the flip side of that, it has been also a lot of conversation and prep with our clients to set expectations of like, hey, we might see impressions go down, we might see traffic go down, but if your leads are going up, you okay with this? And like, I 100% of the time when that's been the conversation, every client is on board. I think it's more about that education and kind of level setting beforehand. So like, hey, this is what we're doing. We're trying things. We're trying to align with your target customer. Let's do what's right for them, because ultimately that's where Google wants to be, because Google Ads is still where they make most of their money. So
yeah.
They don't want to keep losing people to TikTok or DuckDuckGo, which they probably don't really lose people to DuckDuckGo, but we'll just say it anyways. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. Begum, anything to add to that?
I am actually curious about seeing what SG or Bing Chat is going to do on that front, because we all know that they are kind of becoming the answer engine and kind of powering that rather than covering everything in general. So yes, specifically going after like passage content indexing and topic clusters, etc. They have all been kind of focused to get content in different buckets so that it could be found more easily and to the point directly covers what the query is or the search intent is. But switching to that, I don't know if users are going to start using them as much, how much trust they're going to put into those different technologies. And it is obviously a very different level of search where you can put images to your queries, etc. But
cool.
It is going to be like very interesting to see how people are going to engage with that as well. And from long form content to focusing very niche and tiny, like here's your answer kind of bit content, like pill content, I guess. It is intriguing to see how Google is going to prioritize, and also other platforms, like how that is going to be found, because with the partnership of Google with Reddit, I think that is one of the things that we are going to see lots of various like community stuff, because it's going to get used to how people really speak in daily life, and those are going to power the LLMs, and it's just going to be better at understanding how humans really create content and want to expect. So when we see the directories, also what people have been using for searching for from other users, I think it's going to come to how well your content can be found in human terms rather than covering everything in a broad sphere.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point that you bring up about the partnership with Reddit. And I'm sure we could have an entire episode just on that. But I think that goes to show how much, like, okay, there's a lot of reports coming out that users don't trust AI. and a lot of companies that are starting to ask, I think, really good questions about like, how do I know what has trained this LLM or this model? Like, it's a black box of what was used for training. And so that, depending on what kind of industry you're in, that can be pretty terrifying. And of course, that brings in a lot of opportunities for bringing in bias into your own messaging and what you're doing. But I think also like with the rise of, we're seeing a lot more Reddit results, but we're also seeing a lot like people before those showed up in search all the time, people who were still interacting with Reddit, their engagement has only been increasing. And I think it just goes to show of people don't trust brands because unfortunately SEOs have been gaming the system for so long, and we have been producing content like the history of concrete. That it's like, why, like people just have an inherent distrust of companies. And it's so much easier to trust that person who lives, half the country away that you've never even met than it is to trust a brand, I think. That's not true for every brand. Obviously, there are some that do extremely well with their reputation. But on the whole, it's just, it's much easier to trust a person than it is for a brand.
I agree. And I think you said something earlier that I think contributes to where we are at in terms of like the SEO landscape. Level setting with clients, right? Like level setting with clients, level setting with directors. One of the huge problems we have is that there's no standard for SEO across board, right? There's none, right? Like we kind of all, like anybody that has over 5, 6 years experience in SEO is self-taught, right? Like we didn't go to school for SEO.
Correct.
And it's a practice I still evolve in the sense that like what person A is doing with their clients is going to be very, very different for what person B is doing with their clients. And a lot of SEOs new into the game don't even realize that, it's not just about traffic, right? Like, but we all started that way, right? Like we all were very, very focused on seeing, the clicks go up and seeing impressions go up. And the difficulty now is if Google has always been rewarding a certain type of behavior, and managers and directors of big enterprises and are level setting and saying, hey, this is what I class as success, is I want to see traffic go up three times, 300%, or see 3x traffic, or see, it becomes a very, very difficult thing for an SEO to make when it's like, well, I know I can easily rank for history of concrete and traffic, right? So am I making the best possible decision that I could potentially be making? And I mean, up to now, Google is still rewarding like topical authority in that sense, where it's like, they still reward like, building mass amount of content, and like, you start to see your traffic and your rank for your money pages even start to rise the more content you have. So as much as we want to do the right thing, is the reward, what is the reward for the effort of the work you're doing? Essentially, if you're not an agency, if you don't get to be to your own clients and say, hey, this is the expectations you can have of us, and this is how we're going to be. This is what we think. This is what we think rewards should be, and this is what we think positive like achievement should look like. For the SEO manager or the SEO specialist that is like trying to get a job and gets a job and has to fit into the mold that has been created by a previous SEO or by the head of marketing that has very little SEO experience, they're working in a very, very difficult space.
That's so true. Yeah. And I think honestly, talking about setting expectations really set this up perfectly for our next question, which is really just when you're doing your SEO, when like the daily practice, what are some of the ethical considerations that you think should start, like if we were to have a standard, what are some of those ethical considerations you would want to be part of that? And then are there any boundaries that you think are like hard lines that we shouldn't cross, but maybe as an industry have done often, or you've seen it in practice?
Oh man.
Heavy question, I know.
I mean, I think over the years, we've seen so many different things that we consider black hat, and we would ask ourselves, like, is black hat really black hat? Or like, again, if you're getting rewards, then like if Google is rewarding it, then is it technically black hat? But the truth is it is, right? And there was a post that, and what I'm about to say might be very controversial, I might get me canceled in the SEO community, but there's a post that came out which was about SEO heist. I don't know if you guys remember the SEO heist, right?
Mm-hmm.
But essentially what they did, like, where do we draw the line? Do we draw the line in the gap analysis, or do we draw the line in the skilled creation of content, right? Because essentially all SEOs do gap analysis, right? Like, we all look at our competitors, look at what they're ranking for, and essentially try and build pages that replicate that. But everyone was kind of annoyed because essentially you took the gap analysis that you did and essentially just dumped it into AI and produced a mass amount of content. And I think there's a line somewhere in the middle, right? Like, where I find like doing gap analysis is fine. I do gap analysis all day. I mean,
we have to. SEO's a race. It's all about
right?
it's all about the other players in your space, right? It's
Exactly.
we're not in a box, yeah.
But I do think plagiarism is something that we need to be very, very mindful of. And just taking AI content and spinning it out and like dumping it, I think is essentially, you know, it's easy work, but again, I don't know where to draw the line. I'll be honest. So I think I'm just going to sit on the fence because, you know, again, are you deceiving an audience? Like, are you deceiving your audience by, you know, essentially taking, because it's very easy to do a top 10 review or something like that, especially in the affiliate space, right? Like, and whip up content with AI and add like a personal touch, right? And you watch all these case studies and they tell you things like, oh, go pick up pictures from Facebook Marketplace. And that's like a great, like, what are we doing?
Mhm.
It's gotten so bad that it affects my experience now, right? Like, anytime perfect example. I had a conversation yesterday with a friend and he said, I'm about to buy a pair of headphones and I've been doing some research. And my first question was, where did you find the information? Because I'm like, I got very scared because I'm like, are you literally just looking at what is essentially a bunch of SEOs coming together and putting together top 10 articles? Now, when I do my research, I go to Reddit, I go to YouTube, I like, essentially, the product I love and what I work on, I don't trust it anymore because of SEOs.
Exactly.
I feel that so much. Yeah, I feel like as much as I love being SEO, I love the work. It's definitely the channel I love the most. I've been fortunate to work pretty much across the digital network, but it's definitely my favorite channel. And yet, yeah, I'm with you of like, I don't trust us. What have we done? But yeah, it is a lot of like when I look up information, I'm like, all right, who are their sources? Let me cite this. Can I find 3 other places that are saying the same thing, but not the exact same thing? Because then somebody just copied and pasted. And bringing up plagiarism, yeah, I'm kind of appalled, frankly, of how much plagiarism is still a problem with the fact that ChatGPT and other tools are still around. I'm like, you couldn't take the 3 extra keystrokes to say rewrite this. Like, come on. But then I do think, and we talked about it earlier, of not knowing what is being used to train these models and what kind of copyright has already been infringed. I mean, that's also why OpenAI has a lot of open cases right now. That I do find it really interesting that now the US Office of Copyright is saying that anything that uses generative AI to create it can be copyrighted as long as human involvement was significant, which of course they don't give any kind of meaning or about like parameters around what does significant mean. Gotta love it when they do that. But it's just where I get worried about that is just what biases are we perpetuating because we're all using the same tools, or it's all coming from like, let's be real, a huge part of the internet is not a place I would ever want my 7-year-old to see. And yet I'm using models to do my work that are probably trained on some of that content. So it's just, I think I'm with you. Like, it's a lot of gray area. Where do we go? How do we draw lines? I think those are really big questions that honestly should be answered by people much smarter than me. But it is scary. And to think about, like, like you say, is it really duping somebody when you use generative AI to speed up your process? I don't think so. Like, it just means we're working smarter, not harder, right? Like, I mean, does that mean that when we use Excel formulas, we're fooling somebody because we're not manually doing the math? Well, that seems silly.
I do think it is duping when you create content, first-hand content that isn't first-hand. And
I agree with that.
That is prominent. And the other aspect that I should have touched on too is parasite SEO and how impactful that could be. Because essentially, if you could whip up anything and find the right like brand to attach yourself to, like the right local newspaper, or right now even LinkedIn is being used for parasite SEO. It's insane, right? What we SEOs are able to do, right? It does scare me because I'm happy that Google does have like a better grasp on the medical space, because that could really be dangerous.
Mm-hmm. So true. Yeah.
I think, sorry, Sam, go ahead.
No, you.
Sorry. I think another angle of that is whether you disclose you're using AI in your processes to your users or not. I think that is very important as well, because I get so frustrated looking at a bunch of AI articles or listicles that are gathered from different places. So if you are really citing your resources or saying if you're using AI to improve your processes, that can be kind of a good thing to include in your
being more transparent about your process.
Exactly.
Making a note for the Grey Dot website right now. Yeah, because we actually use it a lot for like we do all the like content creation ourselves, but we use it a lot for like summarize this, make me a Twitter thread, give me social media posts. What are the quotable things to highlight? Yeah. But yeah, it's just really interesting to see where it's going to go. And I'm with you. Transparency, I think, is really important. And I think, though, the truth is, as companies disclose that, it might hurt because there's so many companies that aren't disclosing. So they look like they're not using it. But I swear to God, if I have to see one more article about SEO that says in the ever-changing landscape, obviously written by AI, okay?
It is very frustrating to see that content. And also, it is much more confusing even to us SEOs, I guess. When there are so many places that we have to check and ensure that our work is quality, and kind of going through a process to really reflect the value in it. So I think when it comes to like publishing anything in today's world, just providing your leadership and your opinions about everything is the vital thing, rather than covering a topic in its wider sense, because what people really care about is kind of like having an opinion about what everyone else is thinking about it, or the facts that have been like laid out in the beginning. There are so many companies who are using a templated admin author and just getting away with publishing content and just going through the pipeline, which we really don't want to see, I guess, moving forward. It's just frustrating for everybody.
No, I agree with that. All right. So on that super cheery note.
Super clear.
So for anyone who's starting in SEO, right? So we do know there are courses that are out there now. People might actually be choosing to be an SEO instead of just kind of falling into it. So what would be the one piece of advice or like tool that you would recommend? Because of course there's so much information, but where should any SEO kind of start or keep in mind as they get going?
That's a really good question. And I think the one advice I would give any SEO is experiment and validate, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're starting out, don't take anybody's advice as gospel, right? Because a lot of SEO is a lot of times very use case specific, right? So something might be true for a different vertical, might not be true for your vertical. And it's very, very important that you experiment yourself. Only listen, like you listen to what Google has to say. And I would say also try and understand the why and the how Google operates, right? And if you start from there, then you can essentially add other skill sets. And like, I think one skill set that every SEO should have is data and research. But yeah, just experiment and validate, right? I think that's my biggest, like my one key advice, you know.
Awesome. No, I think that's great. Begum, what is yours?
Experimenting
I was going to ask
is a good one. Experimenting is an amazing one. The question is coming right back at you too, so you better start thinking about it. Experimenting is a very good one. I would say familiarize yourself with user trends and how search trends evolve. Just stay on top of trends, because I think most of us, even though we are in search, we are losing sight of most of the search trends. So I think trying to see them at least beforehand would be a very useful thing for your career moving forward.
Awesome.
And what about you, Sam? What's your big tip?
So Shigen, I'm actually going to go back to what you said about one of your first directors or mentors about always be providing value to the user. That has been the North Star for a lot of my career. And I think has ultimately, there have definitely been times where doing the right thing, and I'm going to put that in quotes because, that's all subjective, but like creating content for the enterprise customer maybe wasn't the right thing for getting in the most traffic, right? Or, just meeting your customers where they are ideally will help. And because of black hat tactics, or people find a loophole and they're trying to game the algorithm all the time, like there are going to be times where maybe that sets you a little bit behind. But I think in the long term, I have seen it always work in the long run. That keeping that North Star of, am I providing value to my user? If you can confidently say that, yes, I am, which there's a lot to that, right? You have to do user research. You have to figure out who is the user, what is the target, what do they care about? What are their top questions? Are we answering them? Are we answering them in the way that they want it to be answered? Right? Like I think about recipe sites and what happened with that. Most of us were just looking up a recipe. We just wanted the ingredients list and the process. I did not need to know your entire life story of growing up in Saskatchewan or, whatever it is. So, which might be super fascinating if I were to meet you in a bar, but not great when I just want to make some pancakes. So I think that's what it is. And it's a very loaded thing, but just always be asking, does this serve my user? And I've also heard some where that's shifted of, does this align with any business goals? That's usually a much more tactile way that you can then report well to higher ups, people who think SEO is a black box, or we're just in a back room sacrificing goats. Because I have been on calls where people literally thought that's what we were doing, and it was really weird. That was a long time ago, but it was weird. So it's just all of that of, keep the focus. And ultimately, I think that should serve you, because that's also when you start thinking about things beyond just Google, beyond the latest algorithm trend. You really just try to get to know your customers, what their needs are, and how you can actually meet them. So that would be mine.
Wonderful.
I
Thank you all
agree.
so much for sharing that. Go ahead, second.
Oh, I just said I agree.
Yay!
Okay. I guess that's a wrap, everyone.
Yes. Thank you so
Great.
much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Segun, for joining us. I really loved your insights. And you're so much fun to talk to. You're just so calming and a very charming presence. So we're really glad we got to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me as well. This was so much fun. I really wish we had another hour because there's so much we could.
Well, we'll have to do another one. Certainly, anybody who has questions, remember that you can submit them to thegray.company/ask-SEO, and we will tackle your questions and then catch us next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.